I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tadyata gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi svaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asharas, gandharas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Yeah, welcome everybody. Having laid out the general plan for what I was going to do with these three different visions of profound reality, and then spoken for the last, 2.5 sessions about Tsongkhapa's view, in which emptiness, which is the sheer negation of inherent existence, is itself the profound reality that we must realize in order to be free from needless suffering. Tonight, I'm going to go on to talk about the second view, a different view. You notice in the Heart Sutra, it says, without stain, but not, it's not stained, but not unstained either, right? It negates both being stained and being unstained in the Heart Sutra, right? So that's definitely an emptiness mindset, right? Things are neither inherently good nor they're inherently bad. We have to make these distinctions between what's stained and what's unstained, what's good and what's bad, and even what's red and what's blue. We have to make these distinctions conventionally, and these conventions have a legitimacy to it in Tsongkhapa's system. But ultimately, from the point of view of emptiness, as the Heart Sutra makes clear, there isn't any, there aren't any Four Noble Truths, there aren't any 12 links of dependent arising, and there isn't any annihilation of them either. Like anything that you can talk to is about or point at is empty and ungraspable in an ultimate sense. So some people might find that to be unsatisfactory as the basis for a religious view. Do you see what I'm saying? It could sound like definitely too negative. And I may have mentioned, but if I didn't, I will now, that, Tsongkhapa bases his teachings on Chandrakirti's Prasangika interpretation of Madhyamaka. And Chandrakirti's views were not the most popular in India during his lifetime or for the next couple centuries after that. And they were preserved, and there was a commentary, but really more of the Mahayana Buddhists were interested in the Svatantrika or the Yogachara schools of Mahayana philosophy, because they allowed for there to be something on the object side that allowed you to talk about the difference between a cat and a hat, and not saying that everything is just an imputation by thought, the way we get in Chandrakirti. I was in Boston visiting the people at Wisdom Publications a few years ago, and they took me out to lunch with, the publisher and a few editors, and we were sitting around, and one of the guys said something like, "The fundamental nature of everything is good." And the other guy said, "There is no fundamental nature of everything." and interestingly, that's one way to read the whole history of Buddhist philosophy, right? Is to say there's a fundamental Buddha nature essence, which is the core of goodness, right? Our primordial, pristine Buddha nature. And another way of saying, no, well, there isn't any phenomena that exists that has a permanent, graspable, fixed nature, right? It's openness or naturelessness that liberates us. And the other people say, that's just way too negative. How can you have a negation as being the final word, the final reality, right? Yeah. So that's what I'm going to talk about today is this second view, which is not, you know, in Tibetan we say Rangluk, you know, it's not obviously Tsongkhapa's view is my home in a sense, right? I'm also a follower of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. The first time I had a private audience with the Dalai Lama was in 1985. And when I was got my, you know, appointment and I was going in to see him, there was a Nyingma Lama coming out, and His Holiness had just been studying with the Nyingma Lama, right? Yeah. And one of the big splits.
The Nyingma Lama.
I don't know what his name was. I have no idea. I was.
What is it?
Oh, what is a Nyingma Lama? Okay.
Uh-huh.
Who's talking? Which one of you is talking? Sorry. Oh, okay. So there's you know, different, we say Chirluk or Dharma traditions in Tibet. And there actually are more than this, but just for the sake of simplicity, we usually talk about 4, right? The Nyingma is the oldest of these traditions, right? And then there's the Kagyupa and the Sakya and the Gelugpa, right? So Tsongkhapa is the founder of the Gelugpa lineage, and His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, is a member of that lineage. But Tsongkhapa studied with teachers from all different lineages. There weren't any Gelugpas. His main teacher, right, was the Sakyapa Rendawa, but he had teachers from, right? He couldn't study with Gelugpa teachers because there weren't any before that, right?
Wasn't Gautama a Sankhya prince from Sankhya tribe?
Who?
Something?
Which one?
Gautama, the OG Buddha.
I don't know.
Gautama.
Oh, Gautama Buddha, the historical Buddha. Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah.
And wasn't
he?
Is he
not Sankhya clan?
Oh, now I get what you're saying. Yeah, that's a different thing. Yeah. That's a different word.
Is that not
totally different?
Oh, okay.
Okay, totally different word. Good point. So, right. So Sakya
wouldn't that be the oldest?
No. Good. I understand why you think that. So,
okay.
Shakya is the clan. Shakya is the clan that the Buddha belonged to in, you know, when he was, you know, Kapilavastu and Lumbini, and when he lived in the Nepal and India area, right? During his lifetime, he was a member of the Shakya clan, right? That's different from Sakya. Sakya is a Tibetan word that means like gray earth, right? So it refers to, I guess, a particular area. And so the lineage of lamas in Tibet, you know, that one of the 4 main lineages is called the gray earth people. Whereas okay. Yeah, so it's completely different. Thanks. It sounds a little bit alike, but it's different from Shakya and Sakya, right? Shakyamuni. Yeah. Okay.
Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay.
Thanks. Yeah. So, So my point was that Tsongkhapa had teachers from all the different lineages, most of the different lineages. I guess there might be exception in the Jonang, but most of the different lineages, he had teachers and studied all different kinds of things with these different teachers. And then he came to a definitive, you know, he eventually came to a definitive view, right? That started a new Dharma tradition. And And then sometimes that tradition got into doctrinal disputes with other traditions down to today, right? And His Holiness the Dalai Lama, being the Dalai Lama of, all Tibetan Buddhists, or, I would like to think that way anyway, he's very inclusive, or we say ecumenical, right? So he studies, he doesn't scorn to study and to take seriously and try to deeply understand. In fact, I think he said that, there are paths or means of awakening in all of the four Churluk, all the four Dharma systems of Tibet. It's not only the Gyaltsen. And so the Gyaltsen, that's kind of like a challenging thing to say for a very orthodox Gyaltsen, because the Gyaltsen will say that you have to realize this sheer negation of any graspable essence or self-nature. And if you don't realize that sheer negation, right, as the profound reality, then you're not really going to be liberated. And if your mind is still holding on to some positive thing, then that's not really going to be liberation. So do you see that there's a problem of, and so His Holiness is very, very sharp and clever, and he figures out, ways to, I was going to say to finesse these differences, but it's deeper than that. He finds ways to reconcile things that would seem irreconcilable, and right, and to say, something that doesn't sound like meditation on emptiness at all, that's done in a different tradition. He can explain how functionally it can serve as a path to realizing emptiness. So he's not going to give up on his Gyaltsen views, but he's going to try to explain how all these other traditions, even though they don't talk the same way, have paths to liberation. So yeah, in that way, even though, Tsongkhapa, Je Rinpoche, Lama Tsongkhapa's view is my home in terms of, thinking about the philosophy of Buddhism, I try to be open-minded in thinking about these others. And this is in line, I think, with, Bodhisattva practice. It's in line not just with what His Holiness says, but also with this root idea of the Buddha as a doctor. And a doctor doesn't just have one medicine. So, a dogmatic Gyaltsen will say, well, there's only one real medicine for the root of cyclic existence, and that's realizing this sheer negation of any essential nature, which you have to do by rational analysis that identifies the object of negation and so forth, right? So these other people aren't really going to get anywhere at all. Well, maybe there's other people who, when they hear that, feel afraid or harmed or, or damaged. Do you know what I'm saying? That it's not the right medicine for them. We could posit for the sake of arguments that the Gyaltsen are right, and that's ultimately the medicine that everybody needs. But it doesn't follow that it's the medicine that everybody needs right now. At least you can acknowledge that, for the time being, different people need different medicines. So this is one of the other medicines that's in the Dharma pharmacy. So let's, let me stop. Can I share my screen now? Let's see. Oh yeah, I got it. Okay, well, we'll see what we can get through. So just to remember, we have these three visions is what I started with. The profound reality is the lack or absence in things of a distorted kind of existence that in fact couldn't exist at all, ever, anywhere. And this lack or absence is called emptiness or no self. And that negation is itself the most profound reality. That's Tsongkhapa's view. And then today we're going to do second view, which is the profound liberating reality, is the intrinsic perfection of Buddha nature as primordially present in all beings. And then we'll talk about the third one next time. So after I wrote the book Introduction to Emptiness, to try to explain that view of emptiness that Tsongkhapa presents in the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment, I, of course, was attuned to what other books were coming out that were sort of parallel to mine, that trying to explain emptiness in a somewhat less technical way, right? And a book that struck me right away was this book by Andy Carr called Contemplating Reality. And it's a very witty book. It's much funnier, more clever, really, than my book. But it has a different view of what it has view number 2 rather than view number 1, right? So he tells a story in the book about a Kagyu teacher who's setting out for the West, and he goes to the Karmapa and asks, how am I going to talk to these Westerners? So he doesn't say who this teacher is, but it might have been Chogyam Trungpa. He sort of leaves that open to interpretation. But what am I going to say? I've never been to the West. What am I going to say to these Westerners, about the Dharma? And the Karmapa says, tell them that they are basically, fundamentally, right, good. They're basically good. And if they want to know more, tell them that they are Buddhas, right? Yeah, so you're a Buddha, I'm a Buddha, he's a Buddha, she's a Buddha, my dog's a Buddha, and so forth, right? Fundamentally, right, we're all Buddhas is a different kind of message than everything is fundamentally empty, whereby it's possible for us to become Buddhas here in this other way. Yeah, deep down, in some fundamental sense, we really are Buddhas, right? So it's a contrast with the way His Holiness the Dalai Lama speaks, usually at least. He's a gradualist. He's thinking that we're not Buddhas and that it's going to take a while for us to become Buddhas, and it's going to require a lot of different causes and conditions to come together over a long period of time, and we should get started on the odyssey or the journey, to enlightenment. And yeah, when he gave teachings on the Great Treatise in 2008, I think at Lehigh University, which is in the book From Here to Enlightenment, I did the translation and editing of those teachings as From Here to Enlightenment. And I got the title, I made up this title from what His Holiness said at the very end after going through the Great Treatise on the Stage of the Path to Enlightenment. He's sitting on the stage in this huge auditorium and he's pointing up at the rafters in the back, so way up high and way far away. And he was saying like, well, we're here and Buddhahood is up there, so it's going to take a while, but we need to get started. So that's very, very different from saying, hey, you're really a Buddha, right? So we saw in vision number 1, we suffer needlessly because we're adding something extra that's false onto things, this inherent, this delusion about inherent existence. And that provides the growth medium for greed and hatred and fear and anger and so forth. But, as I mentioned, it's not right. It's in the tradition, it will be acknowledged that it's not good medicine for everybody. Shouldn't necessarily teach emptiness to people for whom it will be harmful, because there are people for whom it will be harmful. So, right, people might already feel depressed and feel that emptiness, instead of opening things up, makes them feel more depressed, or they may feel grief-stricken and they feel more depressed when they hear about emptiness, perhaps. or people might be afraid of becoming non-existent in some way, and emptiness sort of confirms their fears. Or there's the idea that people just feel they're unworthy, that they loathe themselves, or at least they're not comfortable with themselves. It doesn't help them to be told that in addition to their own, pre-existing negative ideas about themselves, the deepest truth about themselves is also completely negative, right? And so it could be that, for many people like that, it's better to treat them with a medicine that's positive and affirming about, to tell people that they're innately perfect. There's a lot of good psychology to this, right? If you have a person, that you're working with in therapy, or you're trying to help somebody else, get better, one of the first things that's useful to do is to tell them to love themselves and accept themselves the way they are. And right, it's paradoxical, because you think, well, if I tell them to accept themselves and love themselves the way they are, they're never going to change. But it turns out that that's not always true. It's usually not true, that when people love themselves and accept themselves the way they are, they get free from this tangle of constantly criticizing themselves, and then criticizing themselves for criticizing themselves, and running around in a circle. They get liberated from that by this basic feeling of okayness, right? And that makes it possible for them to see, given that I'm basically okay, what would be a good way to go forward with my life? And right, it's a well-known psychological technique, that works. It helps people. And this is I think the ancient Buddhist version of it. So the final fruit of practice has actually always been with us, and it's not a negation. So after Buddha taught emptiness in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, he taught Tathagata Garbha, or we're going to, well, sometimes we'll just use that word, but mostly it's translated as Buddha nature, as part of the sutras that are in the third turning of the wheel. So one of the arguments that you see in this tradition is that people like the Dalai Lama, as he's talking, is thinking of Buddhahood as the outcome of many causes and conditions, and he probably wouldn't actually posit that, but our attainment of Buddhahood is the outcome of many causes and conditions, right? And the argument that these primordial, pristine, everybody's already a Buddha from the very beginning people give is, say, if Buddhahood itself were the product of causes and conditions, our practice on the path, then like every other produced thing, it would be subject to decay and impermanence. And, you could become a Buddha for a little while and then not be a Buddha anymore, right? Because the causes and conditions that caused you to attain Buddhahood were unstable, right? So that's what they're saying, is like the only way we can really become Buddhas is to already have been Buddhas from the very beginning and just not know it yet, in some sense. So the path, instead of being a path to something that we haven't realized yet, in this different vision, it's a path in revealing or uncovering the Buddhahood that's always been there. You could say from the very beginning, but that's not exactly right, because it's not, primordially, right? Beginninglessly. So now I'm gonna do a thing where I'm gonna try to show you some passages in a wide range of texts that speak to this from different angles. So I'm going to start with the Pali Canon, right, which we think of course, as the first turning of the wheel, right? But in the first turning of the wheel, I argued last time or the time before, you can find texts that seem to be pointing at the profound emptiness, or it could be certainly read that way. And likewise, in the first turning of the wheel, the Pali Canon, you can find texts that may be pointing, or could be certainly understood at pointing at this idea of a fundamental purity of mind that's always been there. And so we'll start with that, and then we'll go down through, you know, up to the present day and look at some different things that people have said about this. So this is the words of Buddha from the Pali Canon. Luminous, monks, is the mind, and it's defiled by incoming defilements. Luminous, monks, is the mind, and it's freed from incoming defilements. The uninstructed ordinary person doesn't discern that as it actually is present, which is why I tell you that for the uninstructed ordinary person, there is no development of mind. The well-instructed disciple of the noble ones discerns that, the innate luminosity of the mind, as it is actually present, which is why I tell you that for the well-instructed disciple of the noble ones, there is development of the mind. So this is this scripture is accepted, you know, as the word of Buddha in the Theravada tradition. And, you know, when we read it from a Mahayana perspective, it seems to be talking about, you know, the mind of clear light, or a fundamental mind of enlightenment that's there from the very beginning, depending on how exactly we're looking at it. But that doesn't seem to be what the sutra, you know, I mean, that might be, well, let me put it this way. The Theravada Buddhists are not comfortable with that. And they have their own reading, but their reading, in my opinion, doesn't really make very much sense. So the idea is the mind is already fundamentally luminous, you know, but it's not recognized as such, but we can come to recognize it as such, and that way we progress. So if you read Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who is a Theravada monk, and he explains this passage, he tries to say that the luminosity, the fundamental radiance of the mind is something that comes about gradually through the path of purification, because, you know, Theravada Buddhists are gradualists, right? We're not Buddhists from the very beginning. In fact, in their view, most of us never will be. So the luminosity of the mind is something that's attained, you know, through ethics and meditation and wisdom. But that is not what the text says. If you look at it, he says very clearly the luminosity is not seen as it is by ordinary persons, but it's already there, right? A well-instructed person develops the mind by seeing the luminosity that was already there as the basic character of the mind. That's the way the text reads, and you have to twist it a little bit to say something different, I think. So this seems to, you know, preclude the idea that the mind is just becoming luminous. Rather, there's in the Pali Canon, it's being the basic nature of the mind is luminous even before we practice, right? And so there's more passages like that. So yeah, I've edited these for clarity a little bit. So Buddha is speaking in another sutta, and he says, having known the all as the all, and having directly known the extent of what has not been experienced through the allness of the all, I wasn't the all, I wasn't in the all, I wasn't coming forth from the all, I wasn't the all is mine, I didn't affirm the all. Thus, I am not your mere equal in terms of direct knowing. He's speaking to an antagonist, you know, another person with a different point of view. And then this is what the Buddha sums up, you know, like speaking his own point of view. Consciousness without surface, or it could be translated without boundary. Consciousness without surface, endless, radiant all around, is not experienced through the earthiness of earth, or the liquidity of liquid, or the fieriness of fire, or the windiness of wind, or the allness of the all, right? So this, you know, I don't know. It seems, it's hard for me, coming from where I'm coming from, to not read this as talking about, you know, the emptiness of things. The emptiness of fire doesn't have an intrinsic nature of fieriness and so forth, that absence is what makes it possible for there to be boundless, radiant consciousness, right? That you can't experience boundless, radiant consciousness without surface or edge, right? Unless you recognize that there isn't any intrinsic fieriness in fire or windiness in wind or everythingness in everything, right? What an interesting thing, right? That's in the Majjhima Nikaya, you know, one of the texts of the Pali Canon. So again, it's talking about, you know, the radiance of consciousness. And here it seems to be associating that a little bit with the unfindability of an essential nature in things. And yet again, here's one other passage from the Pali Canon. This is Buddha speaking again, where do water, earth, fire, and wind have no footing? Where are they groundless? Right? Where are long and short, coarse and fine, fair and foul, name and form brought to an end? You know, what is it? Goes beyond duality. The answer is consciousness without feature, without end, luminous all around. Here in this consciousness, right, that earth, water, fire, and wind have no footing, right? Long courses are all brought to an end. So all of the dualistic conceptions and grasping at water as having an inherent nature of wet and so forth, right, comes to an end, and it comes to an end specifically in this boundless luminosity of the mind. This is in the Digha Nikaya. So there's like 3 different parts of the Pali Canon, but they're saying something that fits together very well in talking about the radiance or boundless luminosity of the mind, even before we practice. So of course, you know, people can debate what these passages mean, but it's hard to not look back at them as precursors of the fuller development of the idea of Buddha nature. Of course, in Theravada Buddhism, you know, who regards these texts as the only scriptures of the Buddha, they don't have a conception of Buddha nature as something that's pervasive through people, and so it's not right. It's something that requires them to do some interpretation. So then in the second turning of the wheel, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 8,000 lines is thought to be either the oldest or the second oldest known text in the second turning, you know, an emptiness focused text. Some people think it's the Vajracchedika, which is the Diamond Sutra, and some people say it's a Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines. I have no idea, but this is a passage from that text. The mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, is no mind, and that's a kind of thing that, you know, the Heart Sutra would say, a lot of second turning of texts say, but it says it's no mind because its essential original in its essential original nature, mind is transparently luminous, right? So that's kind of echoing the teachings of the Pali Canon. The essential luminosity of the mind is linked to the mind of enlightenment's non-mindiness. Just like fire doesn't have fieriness essentially, right? Mind, even a mind of enlightenment, is not essentially a mind because originally it's transparently luminous. Okay, so we have this word, Tathagata Garbha. So this is Sanskrit. This is the term that's being translated as Buddha nature. There are other terms, and yeah, there's so many variations, right? But this is the single most frequent one. It's not literally Buddha nature, right? Because it's the word Tathagata is being used as a synonym for a Buddha, right? And it's not literally nature because the word Garbha, meaning like a seed or a womb, or Hopkins is doing matrix now. So it's like a source or a field or an essence or something like that. So tata means thus or suchness. Now we don't know, there's a long A there, tathagata. So you can't tell, because of the way Sanskrit works, is whether it's tathagata or whether it's tathagata. So it could be either one or both, right? So it could be the thus gone one, the one gone to suchness, or it could be come as well. And then garba means the womb or seed or matrix. So the most, you could translate Tathagata as the thus gone one. And then people usually are translating Tathagata Garba as Buddha nature, or with one word or two words. But not everybody does, right? There's other translations, because it's not literally Buddha nature, but it seems to be, the most useful. When you make more literal translations, they get more confusing to people. So we're talking about Buddha nature now. Other uses of this term, Tathagata Garba, there's a passage in the Anguttara Nikaya, which is a Pali text, but it's found only in the Chinese version of that text. So we don't know, it's not found in Pali or Sanskrit. But anyway, according to the Chinese version of this originally Pali text, it talks about Tathagata Garba as being, the lineage or the essence of becoming a perfectly awakened one. And if you're devoted to the text that you're reading at that time, it shows that you have that destiny, right, to become a Tathagata, meaning a fully awakened one. And then there's another perfection of wisdom text. It's called the Perfection of Wisdom in 150 lines. And it turns out that this text is not really classed with the other Perfection of Wisdom sutras. It's much later, and actually appears in a tantric context, unlike the other Perfection of Wisdom sutras. So it's not so surprising that it talks about Tathagata Garba. It says all sentient beings possess the Tathagata Garba because their entire being is that of the great Bodhisattva Samantabhadra. Okay, yeah, so Samantabhadra means like the all good, right? And he appears as a bodhisattva in a Buddhist scripture called the Ganda Vyuha, in which he, where he teaches the seeker, Sudana, who sort of represents, us, the spiritual seeker, and tells him that, the only point of wisdom is to use it to do good, to help people, right? It isn't something that's intrinsically valuable. It's good in terms of how it serves, right? So Samantabhadra is associated with that and action, good action, right?
I'm sorry, does that line say that we are Samantabhadra?
I couldn't quite understand you, B. What did you say?
The line there, their entire being is that of great Bodhisattva Samantabhadra. Is that saying that we are Samantabhadra?
Yeah, it is. It's saying that, it's identifying that this is the thing that I'm trying to say, is they're going in the direction of saying the fundamental nature of reality. Like, I started with this story about the guy, the wisdom editor, who said, basically we're all good. Goodness is fundamental. There's something called basic goodness. Well, that when you talk about basic goodness, you're talking about this idea that everyone is everyone's body body, mind, right? At the reality of everyone in some fundamental sense is this all good being, right? It's not emptiness, it's perfection. Yeah.
So instead of, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, B.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sneh. Stop.
Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead. Whoever that is.
I was just going to say, in this context, what does Garbha represent? How is it translated into gone to suchness?
Okay, good question. I'll go back. So the gone is the gata, right? So Tathagata means a Buddha. A Buddha is one who's gone to suchness. Gata is the past participle of the verb gam, which means to go in Sanskrit. So gata means gone, but because of the way the words combine, it could also be come with an a in front. We can't tell because of the way tata and gata fit together. So gone to suchness or come into reality. Yeah, so that refers to a Buddha. And then the Garbha refers to what we're translating as nature. So this is how we get to Buddha nature. Tathagata is Buddha and Garbha is being loosely translated as nature. Do you see? Yeah. The Tathagata means thus gone one or one gone to thusness. And that's a Buddha. Okay, I move on.
So by saying that we are Samantabhadra, so they have gone from saying that we are Buddha to now saying that we are Samantabhadra, and by being Samantabhadra, we have Buddha nature. So our Buddha nature is being mediated through Samantabhadra.
Yeah, but you could say it that way, B. Yeah, but you have to realize that in these sorts of texts are not necessarily focused on the logic of distinctions between what's a bodhisattva and what's a Buddha. For example, Samantabhadra is also the name of a Buddha as well as the name of a bodhisattva. And, for all we know, Samantabhadra, the bodhisattva, is an emanation of the Samantabhadra, the Buddha. I mean, so when they say that the entire being of all sentient beings is the bodhisattva Samantabhadra, they're not, you have to understand what that really means is that the entirety of our reality is fundamental goodness. That's what Samantabhadra means. It's a personification of fundamental goodness. Goodness in the sense of actively being helpful. That's the sense of Samantabhadra. Samantabhadra is the personification of actively doing good. And that is our fundamental nature. That's what the passage is saying.
Okay, that makes more sense.
It's not distinguishing between bodhisattvas and Buddhas or anything like that. It's just using Samantabhadra to talk about fundamental goodness. So it's the same as the guy, in the restaurant saying, basically, we're all good deep down. So, right, this is another passage using Samantabhadra as the fundamental reality. Samantabhadra is not subject to the limits of time, place, or physical conditions. Samantabhadra is not a colored being with two eyes, etc. Samantabhadra is the unity of awareness and emptiness, the unity of appearances and emptiness, the nature of the mind, the natural clarity with unceasing compassion. That is Samantabhadra from the very beginning. So that's a quote from Kensei Norbu Rinpoche, who is the director of the film The Cup, and obviously is also a tulku. Right, so he's speaking from kind of a Kagyupa point of view. And we see, I'm going to talk about that more later, but from the early 19th century down to today, the idea of criticizing the idea that the ultimate reality is a sheer negation, and saying that it's something else that's positive, right, has characterized Kagyupa. And that's why you have a Kagyupa teacher, the Karmapa, saying, if you're going to go to the West, you need to, what are you going to tell them? You're not going to tell them everything's empty. You're going to tell them that they're all Buddhas, right? That's the good news. Some people just don't want to accept the good news, Snehi. So another way to get to the same, idea is talking about Gotra. That's another Sanskrit word that means like lineage. And early in Buddhism, there was the idea that there's some beings, just a few, like, Siddhartha, who have the lineage to become Buddhas. And there's others who have the lineage, or you could say the destiny. They've got the spiritual DNA to become solitary realizers, and others to become hero disciples. And then in many, but not all texts, there's also the idea that some people have the spiritual DNA whereby they have no potential to ever become free from cyclic existence at all, right? And that view is found in early Buddhism and also in a few early Mahayana texts, but it becomes displaced by the more general Mahayana view that all beings have this Gotra to become, this lineage to become Buddhas, which is most famously and sort of irrevocably proclaimed in the Lotus Sutra. Beings have all different kinds of lineages. Apparently, they have all different kinds of lineages for the time being, right? But whatever kind of lineage they have for the time being, like maybe you're a sociopathic serial killer. So for the time being, it seems like you're an irredeemable person who has no potential to attain nirvana, right? Or maybe you're a person who, for the time being, seems only focused on escaping cyclic existence for yourself, right? And so not really having a bodhisattva motivation. But all of these people, whatever their motivation, eventually will, because all of them have the Buddha nature, all of them have the Buddha lineage, right? So that eventually they'll all be brought into the bodhisattva path and all become Buddhas, right? And Lotus Sutra sort of famously established this as the way Mahayana, almost all Mahayana Buddhists think after that. So we know that besides the emptiness that's taught in the Perfection of Wisdom sutras and the text of the second turning, there's Mahayana also includes the sutras of the third turning of the wheel, the Dharma, which generally we associate with the Yogachara, also called the Chitta Mantra school, which means the mind only or yoga practice teachings, where, we talk about 8 consciousnesses instead of 6 consciousnesses, one of which is the fundamental mind basis of all. And we talk about the 3 natures instead of talking so much about the 2 truths. And there's different focus in the teachings. And the most important texts that, are fit with that are the Sandhi-Nirmochana Sutra and the Descent into Lanka. These sutras are translated into English and you can read them. They're not super long. And you can see where all these teachings come from. But in addition to those, the third turning, it can be taken as including a whole other class of sutras, which are different to such an extent that some people have said that, oh, well, they really should count as a fourth turning. But usually they're classed as part of the third turning. but they're different from the Sandingermochana and the descent into Lanka, because they really stress the idea of primordial perfection, the intrinsic Buddha-ness, the Buddha nature of everybody. So I'm going to look at some of the ideas that come from some of these sutras. There's not like a huge number of them, but I made sort of a compilation here of 6: the Angulimala Sutra, the Srimala Devi Sutra, the Mahayana Parinirvana Sutra. There's 2 sutras, by the way, that have this name of, there's a Pali Sutra called the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is quite different from this Mahayana Parinirvana Sutra. The Tathagata Garbha Sutra, not surprising, the Great Drum Sutra, the sutra requested by King Dharanishvara. These are examples of sutras where this "we're all Buddhas from the very beginning" view is being taught by Buddha in sutras. So I'll just like point out some of the features in these texts. The Great Drum Sutra and some of the other early Tathagata Garbha Sutras say that the Buddha nature is the Dharmakaya, the Buddha's embodiment of reality, right? The Dharma, we are thinking of Dharmakaya is something that one would attain through the practice of the path, right? And they're saying that in a sense, everybody already is or has the Dharmakaya, they just don't know it, right? We're all part of the body of reality, the Dharmakaya. So the idea, it's not, Tathagata Garbha is not a potential, it's not a nature of the individual, rather it's the fundamental nature of reality that's pervasive and shared by all beings. That's what the way Dharmakaya is. The Buddha nature isn't in any particular place. As Kensei Norbu says, it doesn't have two eyes and so forth. It's the fundamental nature of reality as wisdom, compassion combined.
Dharmakaya can refer to the emptiness of the mind, of the Buddha's mind, or the mind of Buddha. So which is it referring to here?
It's referring, I will posit, just for the sake of saying something, that it's referring to the two indifferentiably. But as we go forward and we look at this a little bit more, you see that when you say that this, Buddha's wisdom, knowing the ultimate reality, in this context, you might not want to assume that ultimate reality is a sheer negation of intrinsic existence, right? Because that's not necessarily being taken as the fundamental reality anymore. You'll see in a minute. It's like, because we're thinking no self, emptiness, this is the thing we have to realize. But if the fundamental nature of things, the fundamental reality of things is a positive thing, it's goodness, it's Buddha nature, it's compassion, it's wisdom, right? That's the fundamental reality of thing. It's not a negation. So instead of seeking to these Tathagata Garbha, the Great Drum, and the Angulimala Sutra, instead of seeking to realize no self, impermanence, suffering, and impurity, these sort of classical things in Buddhism, it's turned inside out, because Buddha nature, which is the fundamental reality, we should realize it as self, Atman. And the word Atman is used in these sutras. We should realize it, Buddha nature, as our true self, as our truest identity and deepest identity. And this identity is eternal and permanent and has existed primordially and is blissful and is pure, right? The exact opposite of the kinds of, things we're trying to realize in other forms of Buddhism. So in these sutras, the Dharmakaya is something that's always present, but is obscured by adventitious stains. And when that's the case, afflictions and delusion and so forth, greed and hatred and bad karma. And these have kind of like obscured our Dharmakaya. And when that's the case, the Dharmakaya is called a sentient being. Okay? It's not that it's not the Dharmakaya, but someday it will be. No, the Dharmakaya is called a sentient being when it's in the condition of being obscured. And that same Dharmakaya, right, when practicing the perfections and bodhisattva conduct, that same Dharmakaya is called bodhisattva. And when that same Dharmakaya is free from all stains, then it's called Buddha. So there's a difference between Buddha and a sentient being, but there's not a difference in fundamental nature because all sentient beings are basically the Dharmakaya from the very beginning. So Karl Brunholz is a contemporary Western scholar who's basically an exponent and explicator of contemporary Kagyupa way of, say, like if you think of Naropa Institute or something, the Shambhala International, the Trungpa lineage. Another thing that's sort of interesting, which I didn't really know until I was reading for this talk, is that some of the Tathagata Sutras stress the importance of faith as a necessary condition for awakening. And one of the most important texts in Chinese Buddhism is called The Awakening of the Faith. And it's presented as though it's a translation from Sanskrit, but it isn't really. It's a composition in Chinese that summarizes a lot of this Tathagata and Mahayana philosophy. And so faith is emphasized in the Tathagata Sutras, and possibly, right, and I'm getting this idea from people who were sympathetic to this view, not from critics of it. Possibly this is because, emptiness, as we've been talking about in Gyaltsen, you can know emptiness or realize emptiness through logical analysis. And in fact, the argument is that at least initially you have to do that. But Buddha nature, Tathagata, is not something that is available for logical proof in the same way. So how do we know that we're fundamentally Buddhists from the very beginning? Because we have faith in our teacher who says that to us, right? If we don't have confidence in the Buddha having taught that in sutras, and we don't have confidence in our Lama telling us that, then it isn't something that we're going to deduce through some series of syllogisms like emptiness is. So we come to what I'm going to call a Shastra, or a treatise. The teachings of Buddha nature are most famously elaborated in a 4th or early 5th century treatise that has 2 different names. Took me a while when I was younger to realize that this is the same text, the Ratnagotra Vibhaga or the Uttara Tantra. So the explanation of the jewel lineage, or precious lineage, I guess you could say, or the sublime continuum. Either way, it's talking about something, a continuum or a lineage, something that's always there, that is precious, right? Sublime or jewel-like, right? And so this is a text that is attributed to Maitreya Buddha and written down by a Sangha. And so this is probably the most important text that's everybody who talks about this idea always quotes, more than the individual earlier sutras that I was talking about. In a sense, the Uttara Tantra is kind of a synthesis of a lot of ideas that were in these Tathagata Sutras. And this is what it says: Buddha is without beginning, middle, and end. Buddha is peace itself, uncreated and spontaneously present. Buddha is not a realization due to extraneous conditions. So I'm not changing the wording of this. It's not talking about Buddha as a person, right? Buddha is the fundamental, basic, spontaneous, uncreated nirvana that's existed from the very beginning. And then the text says, talking about the three jewels for a while, it says, the Dharma will be abandoned and is of unsteady nature. It is not the ultimate quality. And the Sangha still has fear. I probably need somebody, some Lama, to give me a commentary on that, because I don't know why the Sangha, because the Sangha is, you know, interpreted as being people who have realized beings, not just, you know, monks and nuns. So why do they still have fear? I don't know. But this is what the text says. The Dharma, you know, comes and goes. The Sangha is still afraid. They're humans, you know, they're subject to fear. So in a true sense, only the Buddha is the refuge among the three refuges. This is what the text says. So we take refuge in the three jewels, but instead of saying that the most important refuge is the Dharma, right? Because that's the actual medicine that will have the active ingredient that will counteract the delusion that there's a root of suffering. Instead of that, the idea is that Buddha is the true refuge, but Buddha is not taken necessarily as a person in the ordinary sense. All beings have Buddha nature because Buddha wisdom is always present within all beings. It's an undefiled nature, free from duality. This is in the this is a slight paraphrase from the Uttara Tantra. Buddha nature is not born, it doesn't die, it suffers no harm, it doesn't get old. Kind of like emptiness. In the, you know, if you think about the Heart Sutra and you put in emptiness where it says Buddha nature here, you can see it's, yeah, it's transcendent, it's nirvana, right? And it's also said to be by nature clear light. So there are many, 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 many different examples, and they're all pretty easy to understand of how to think about this. I mean, Andy Carr, in the book I was referring to earlier, he says, well, think about the cream that exists within the milk before it's skimmed off. Or, you know, think about the sun on a cloudy day, but the sun is still there. And there's, you know, so the Uttara Tantra has 9 classical examples of how to think about this situation. A beautiful lotus that in a flower that hasn't bloomed, the calyx is the, you know, outer part of the bud that contains the flower. Honey that's inside a swarm of bees. This is, you know, greed and hatred and delusion and all this stuff swarming around and stinging, but the honey's in there. That's the Buddha nature. A grain that is still within its husk. Gold that's in a bunch of rotting garbage. A vast treasure that's buried underground in each being's mind, right? The idea is that it's like we're poor people and we're suffering in the deprivations of poverty, not realizing that we have a vast treasure buried under our basement. That's the message. Seed of a mango enclosed within a tough skin, a statue of the Buddha wrapped in filthy rags. A poor woman living in a poor house, meaning the poor house, like a house where people go when they're destitute, pregnant though with a king. Or a beautiful work of art, in this case, not necessarily a statue of Buddha, but just like a master work of art that's been cast in gold through pouring liquid gold into a mold. But in this case, it's still inside its clay mold, so it looks ugly. You're just looking at the clay on the outside and you're not seeing the beautiful work of art cast in gold in the inside, which represents, of course, our Buddha nature. The way these things work, it seems so obvious. It's not, you know, but you get the idea, right? There's something inward that's concealed that is the vastly valuable and perfect, right? Jewel-like, and yet that's not what we see right now because we're seeing the outer calyx or the swarm of bees or the husk on the, or the rotting garbage or the rags and so forth. Okay, so there comes to be, there is in Tibetan Buddhism right now, right, and for a good while, a division between people who propound what's called extrinsic emptiness or emptiness of the other, and people who propound emptiness of self-nature, right, which could be translated intrinsic emptiness. So just to be clear, Tsongkhapa, the Dalai Lama, these people are examples of intrinsic emptiness, that by which they mean that all things are empty of their own essential nature, right? And they don't have any other idea what emptiness means, except that fire doesn't have any intrinsic fieriness and so forth, right? But there's this different idea about emptiness. The people who are focused on Buddha nature, they don't not talk about emptiness. It's that they develop a different way to talk about emptiness, which we call in Tibetan Shentong, or other emptiness, emptiness of the other, or Thupten Jinpa likes extrinsic emptiness. So one of these Tathagata Garbha Sutras, called the Questions of Queen Srimala Devi, seems to address, it seems to be aware of this tension between the idea of emptiness and the idea of Buddha nature. And it addresses it by saying Buddha nature is empty, but not in the way you think. Buddha nature is empty in the specific sense that it's empty of adventitious stains, right? The Buddha statues in the filthy rags, right? But the filthy rags don't contaminate the fundamental purity of the Buddha statue and so forth. And that's what emptiness means. Emptiness means that the true, pure, perfect, primordial, eternal, existent, fundamental identity of Buddha, right, is empty, right, of all kinds of afflictions and defilements which conceal it, right? But it doesn't, it's not, Buddha nature is not empty of its own essence. Buddha nature is non-empty, right? It's self instead of no self. It's not empty of, and this is the phrase of the sutra, it's not empty of its own inseparable qualities. So in other words, Buddha nature is associated with, and we'll see, like the Buddha, being a Buddha involves, having a lot of amazing qualities, right? And this is what's implied here, that all the wisdom of Buddha, the compassion of Buddha, the power of Buddha, the body of Buddha with the 32 marks and the 80, other marks, it's, yeah, those are inseparable qualities, right? So I find it difficult to get my mind around, but that's when they're talking about, the Srimala Devi Sutra, it's like goes in that direction, as saying, the fundamental nature of reality is Buddha, with all the stuff that goes along with being Buddha. So this is the other emptiness, or extrinsic emptiness view, called Shentong in Tibetan. And I have to say that when I wrote the book Introduction to Emptiness, I had spent so much time studying Gyaltsen and so little time studying other forms of Tibetan Buddhism that I didn't realize how much of the Buddhist world would totally not relate to what I was saying and would think it's wrong or superficial, because it's hard to count, right? This isn't an easy thing to know, but it's been estimated that maybe half of the Tibetan Buddhists in the world are proponents, not of this idea that everything is empty of its own nature, but rather that the fundamental nature of things is this, the purity of Buddha, and this emptiness means that Buddha nature's emptiness of the defilement of all these ordinary conventional things. It takes a while to get used to that idea. So this idea of other emptiness has a history of sharp conflict with the Gyaltsen. Snehi?
I have been dying to say, like, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, Brahman, like.
Of course, yes.
It's just.
Right. No, I know exactly what you're saying. And if you want to read a book from a Gyaltsen point of view that just sort of unabashedly attacks this, Sönam Takshur, who's a Tibetan who has a professorship in Tasmania, I believe. He wrote a book called The Two Truths Debates. And it turns out that the debates he's talking about are the debates about this. And he argues pretty clearly in there that from his point of view, these people are, if you hold a Shentong view, you're not even really holding a Buddhist view anymore. And Tsongkhapa appears to say something pretty close to that. So it's like yeah, right? It's a completely logical thing to think. When I taught this at Sravasti Abbey, that's what the nuns there said to me too.
But,
they're like, why aren't we just Hindus, right?
But it also brings up this question, which is, what is the harm of identifying with a Buddha and all his positive qualities?
Right. Well, it could be really helpful, right? It could be really helpful. Like, I mean, there could be harm too. Like, for example, we can think of some human beings who, if they imagine themselves as being Buddhas, would become even worse megalomaniacs than they already are, because you're teaching them to imagine themselves as the most powerful and perfect beings in the universe, and their faults are already tending in that direction. And do you see what I'm saying? It could be a bad thing.
But I'm also thinking, like, as coming from like the Hindu perspective, like if you identify with Brahman, you also have to have the mind that is clear of all afflictions, because otherwise you also then think you're this omnipotent, omnipresent entity.
Yeah, but in another sense, you've always been indifferentiable from Brahman from the very beginning, even when you were stupid.
But isn't that what Buddha nature is also saying? You've always been fundamentally good. You just have these adventitious stains which stop you from realizing that nature.
Right, that's right. So there is a path, which is the path of cleansing the adventitious stains, right? Yeah. So these two views have not always played nice together, right?
May I say something?
Yes. Who is it?
There is this analogy that's oftentimes used in the Buddhist stories, like this idea of getting to the other shore.
Yeah.
And then we have a boat going to the other shore.
Yeah.
And it seems to me, listening to this, the Shentong view is like their focus is on the other shore. They are focusing on all the qualities and all that on the other shore.
Yeah.
But the thing is, to get to the other shore, we need the boat that brings us there, and that boat is emptiness, as explained by the Rangtong view.
Yeah. Well, that's a Rangtong view, right? And so I'm not trying to, I hope you understand, I'm not trying to talk you out of the Rangtong view. I basically hold the Rangtong view myself. I'm trying.
No, I don't think you were. No, I didn't think you were doing that. I've been always trying to find maybe like His Holiness, to try to find a way to harmonize the different viewpoints.
Yeah.
In Buddhism, I think all Buddhists, whatever school and whatever lineages, there's so much emphasis on the ultimate. We always want to realize the ultimate, reach the ultimate, and all of that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, what is the ultimate? I mean, we want to become the Buddha. We want to have the reality of a Buddha. So when we are talking about the reality of the Buddha, we are talking about a conventionality of a Buddha, like the Buddha land, the Buddha's existence, however it is, I have no idea. And so, we are basically talking about transforming our conventionality into the conventionality of an enlightened being. So although the focus is the ultimate really is just the boat to take us to the other reality, which is a conventionality.
Okay, B, I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm doing is saying, okay, I got all that. I understand that. That's the Rangtong view. It's a gradualist view. We're not Buddhas. Someday we will be, but to do that, we have to do some transformation. So that's fine. Then you have to realize that these people are saying, well, you're never going to become a Buddha if you don't have a fundamental nature of being a Buddha in some sense to begin with, right? If your nature is antithetical to that of being, you know, a Buddha, then it will be impossible for you ever to become one. And therefore your fundamental nature is that of a Buddha. And what I'm trying to do with this talk is not persuade people to change their minds. I'm trying to be in good faith with the idea that there are many different medicines in the Buddha's Dharma pharmacy, and some people will benefit from this. Well, not will. I mean, it's manifest that this view appeals to a huge percentage of the Mahayana Buddhist population, and that's not just the case in Tibet, but you know, using different kinds of language, you can find it true in Chinese and Japanese Buddhism as well, right? The idea that we're fundamentally Buddhas from the very beginning. You know, you can see this as a way of talking about the idea of sudden enlightenment in Zen, right? We're already Buddhas. It's not a matter of becoming something we aren't, you know? So I just want you, that's the idea. I just want you to see that there's a strong Rangtong critique of this, but there's another kind of point of view where you can see this is a legitimate Buddhist teaching that the Buddha gave to benefit some people who might not be us. But if we're bodhisattvas, it's not just about what view benefits us, it's what kinds of views might be helpful to different people who come to us. If we have people who come to us who are depressed because they feel that they're horrible human beings, maybe telling them that they're empty would help, or maybe not. And maybe telling them that they're Buddhas from the very beginning would give them some kind of fundamental affirmation, which would like open up their minds to positive change. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's what I'm trying to say.
There's no contradiction there. I mean, that's skillful means.
Right.
Even for people who hold the view of the Rangtong view, that's skillful means. In fact, it is in our vows to not go around telling people about emptiness if we don't think they are ready.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So what are you going to tell them about what their ultimate nature? If you're not going to tell them about emptiness, you could say, yeah, you
tell them that their nature is like the blue sky, just temporarily covered by the cloud.
Yeah, that sounds nicer, right? Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what they need, you know, that's what we tell them.
But maybe you could tell them that they have the fundamental nature of a Buddha, that in an ultimate sense, they're no different from a Buddha. And the sense that they have that they're inferior or deficient is actually an illusion. That's what I'm trying to say. That's one of the medicines, right?
You know, I have said that to Christians who are quite depressed, troubled. Mm-hmm. And I can see on their face, they just brighten up. It's like, oh, you know, I'm such a great being.
Yeah. Exactly. It works. Yeah. No, I know. I mean, that's why I say like half the Mahayana Buddhist world probably prefers this idea to the emptiness idea. So it's a different kind of emptiness, but it's not what we mean by emptiness in Rangtong. So the lineage in Tibet, you know, of this Shentong view, other emptiness view, starts with not super famous person in the 11th century, but it includes Dölpopa, Sherap, Gyaltsen, Taranatha, and Rongjung Dorje, who are all, you know, known as great scholars. So there's a lot of texts in this tradition. And then in the 19th century, you begin to have texts where people are trying to figure out how to talk about these views in relationship to one another in a more constructive way if possible. Dölpopa is the most, you know, influential person. He lived in the, you know, time before Tsongkhapa. He's actually, his life overlapped with Tsongkhapa by 4 years or something. So he didn't believe in like keeping the tantras and the sutras separate or keeping Yogachara and Madhyamaka separate. He combined all of these different ideas into one yogic system that he called Great Madhyamaka. And he was, you know, right, he was a person who argued that our fundamental nature is to have a Buddha's body with all of the marks and all of the characteristics that are inseparable from it, from a Buddha. And of course, Renda, he had been trained originally as a Sakya. And so the Sakyas, when he started going around saying these things, the Sakya teachers were upset. And particularly Rendawa, who was Tsongkhapa's teacher, was very unhappy with Dölpopa's, you know, other emptiness view and very critical of it. And that, you know, and then he taught Tsongkhapa. And in a sense, what Tsongkhapa did was he found a, you know, a full alternative picture of the Rangtong view, this intrinsic emptiness view that could be a, what do you say, an alternative and also a critique of the view of the Jonangbas of Dölpopa. So I'm sort of starting to run out of time here. Maybe you guys know, in the fifth Dalai Lama took the monastery that was associated with Dölpopa and the Jonang teachings, and he forcibly converted it to a Gyaltsen monastery. And he took all the texts that were associated with it at that time and locked them up. And I mistakenly thought when I was a younger graduate student that was that. But it wasn't that. The teaching survived in central and western Tibet in small pockets, and also in certain centers in Amdo, and it continues to thrive, I would say, down to today, and to come apparently into much greater prominence with Kagyupa teachers, starting in the early 19th century and going all the way down to today. So we are everything that's classified as karma, cause and effect, mental afflictions, dependently arisen aggregates, elements, sources. These are not only not encountered as ultimate existent, but we exist without the being sullied by these things, even conventionally. That is, the idea that we're imperfect is not just like is not a conventional fact. It's a complete delusion. Whereas, on the other hand, this is Dölpopa. Whereas, on the other hand, the spontaneously arisen marks and signs, powers, fearlessness, love, great compassion, Vajra-like concentration, infinite wisdom, nature of reality. These are inseparable qualities of a Buddha, which are more numerous than the grains of sand found on the banks of the, oh, this is Jangon Kongtrul. These exist integrally. All these Buddha qualities, all the qualities of Buddha that exist integrally and primordially from the very beginning. So they are not empty. They're empty only in the sense that they're empty of these delusory things like karma and the afflictions. And you can see that he was a 19th century, very influential teacher. And he goes on to say that sutra statements like, you know, find in the Perfection of Wisdom sutras that all phenomena lack their own nature, like the Heart Sutra, saying you simply cannot take these statements literally. And if you accept them and stay literally, all things that exist, everything that exists is empty of its own nature, then this is nihilism as far as he's concerned. And of course, Tsongkhapa disagrees with that. And this is kind of a passage out of the great treatise published in 1402. Some Tibetans, so he doesn't say that guy Dölpopa and his crazy followers. He just says some Tibetans, right? But you can figure it out. Some Tibetans do not posit the ultimate as a sheer elimination of, you know, reified sense of self. Instead, they hold that as the object of a mind that non-mistakenly knows how things exist, the ultimate appears to exist under its own power. So when you have a yogic mind that knows without any error or mistake or confusion how things exist, you see the ultimate nature, the profound, three visions is the second vision of profound reality. What do you see about this profound reality? You see that it exists on its own power. It's self-existent. It exists primordially. It's essentially real. It's permanent. And to understand that is to understand the profound. Tsongkhapa is saying, this is what these people say. And then he says, basically what Senge was saying, he's saying, well, this is really not Buddhist. This stands outside the sphere of all scriptures, according to Tsongkhapa. These people are saying we need to stop conception of self, but the way they do that is not to realize emptiness, but rather by knowing some other unrelated phenomenon as truly existent. So instead of meditating on the emptiness of things that you're grasping and attached to, you're saying, this is Tsongkhapa's characterization. They're saying, no, look over here, at this innate perfection that you've always had from the beginning, and meditate on your pure Buddha nature. And don't do any work on trying to counteract your reifying conception of the objects that you're attached to, right? That's how he's, in other words, he's not very nice about this, right? And he gives this crazy example. Suppose there's no snake at all over in the east, but someone thinks there is and is terrified. Are you going to show them that and prove to them that there's no snake in the east to help them? No, you're not going to do that. What you're going to do is say, hey, there's a tree over there in the west. This is a quote right out of Tsongkhapa, right? So he's I would say he's mocking this view and criticizing it in no uncertain terms. I mean, he criticizes a lot of other people, but often he's quite a bit more tactful than this. Hence, if you want to do well, if you want what's good for yourselves, you shouldn't bother with these views. Okay. Guess I'm pretty close to the end. So this is a 19th century, extrinsic emptiness advocate who is very familiar with the intrinsic emptiness view as well. And he wrote a text that's like a debate between his position and the Tsongkhapa position. And at the end of the text, he says, it's inappropriate for you out of attachment to your own view to hatefully attack the extrinsic emptiness view that I hold. The Buddha's great words are boundless. We each see with our own limited intelligence one perspective. So do not say on that account that all other perspectives are absolutely unacceptable and that they're wrong views and that if you engage with them, you'll fall into hell. Don't say that. To act in that way is a great sin. You should be respectful to all, right? And I think this attitude, all right, of more tolerance or and trying to build bridges rather than fight over what emptiness exactly means. It's characteristic of His Holiness. A few things that I know that he said about this is he said there's such thing as a good other emptiness and a bad other emptiness. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't know exactly. If I tried to draw the line between the good other emptiness and the bad other emptiness, I would probably misrepresent what he thought. But the point of this is that the political point of it is that he's not saying anyone who holds an extrinsic emptiness view is beyond the pale in the way that Tsongkhapa said about some Tibetans, referring to Dölpopa. In other words, maybe Dölpopa is the bad other emptiness, Tsongkhapa seemed to say that he was. But there could be, other people who hold more moderate forms of other emptiness views whose views kind of tend to converge with ours more than we would expect when you start thinking about the clear light mind and the emptiness of the clear light mind, and how the continuum of the clear light mind has existed primordially, right? And this is like the luminous nature of the mind that Polycanon was talking about, and so forth. See? And then another thing he says, he said, I heard him say, if you posit only the Madhyamaka emptiness, and you don't combine that with any ideas about the clear light mind, then it's difficult to account for how humans can become Buddhas. I heard him say this. Yeah. And that's sort of taking on, listening to some of the criticism from the other point of view. So primordially, there has always been this continuum of the fundamentally clear mind, inseparable from the emptiness of that mind. And if people might want to talk about that, that inseparability of the mind and its emptiness as the fundamental nature, rather than just talking about the emptiness as the fundamental nature. Do you see what I'm saying? It starts to become less clear when you put it like this, that there's so big a difference. So left unstated in His Holiness's explanation is the fact that, if you take Chandrakirti's interpretation, the Prasangika interpretation of Madhyamaka, and you look at the end of, what does Chandrakirti actually say? He goes through this, stages of the Bodhisattva path. What does he say when he gets to the end? He describes, naturally, what it's like to be a Buddha. And he seems to describe the Buddha as not being a person who has active consciousnesses, but rather that the Buddha is like, this is his example, a potter who is sitting at a wheel making a pot, and the wheel is spinning, and then the potter leaves, and the pot's still there and spinning. This is what Chandrakirti says. It's like, in other words, the Buddha activity of compassion goes on, right? And on and on and on. But there's no internal landscape anymore, right? Because all of those, we would say any kind of dualistic conceptuality or something has been, eliminated. But in Chandrakirti, it's like, that no, there isn't any kind of what we would think of mind there at all. That's what Chandrakirti says. It's very weird, right? And you don't see Gelugpas talking about that a lot. And when Gelugpas talk about what a Buddha is like, they don't draw from Chandrakirti. They draw from Svatantrika sources or tantric sources that give a more positive view, right? So I think this is the end. Mipam Gyatso is one of the great geniuses of Tibetan Buddhism. And he comes from the Nyingma tradition. And he says, if there were no intuitive, reflexively aware wisdom, which is also what we call the luminous mind, then it would actually be impossible to realize, the actual reality of things, the genuine, way that things are on the path. And if that were the case, Buddhas would have no omniscience, in which case Buddhahood wouldn't be any different from the Hinayana nirvana, just like the extinguishing of a candle flame. So how could anything be said about the Buddhas, the bodies, the wisdoms, or the activity of the Buddha? Consequently, the great founders of Chittamatra Madhyamaka present the profound and the vast in what seem to be different ways, but their final thought arrives at the same point in the expanse of wisdom. Yeah. Mipam is great, right? You don't have to agree with all these people to recognize how amazing they are. right. He's it's when you read Mipam, you know, you're not just reading about, you know, mystical things about the primordial Buddha. He understands Gelugpa logic just as well as Gelugpas do. He understands our position. He totally understands our position, and he doesn't trash it. He tries to incorporate it in a spirit of non-duality with these
Mipam
Mipam
wrote a lot of books. If you could advise one to understand his view?
Yeah, he wrote a lot of books in Tibetan. I guess they say he wrote 36 volumes and covered every single topic. So the books that have helped me the most are the translations by Douglas Duckworth, who's a professor at Temple. That's what I would recommend. Look up his work on Mipam. I think Mipam's view is subtle and complex. He's not just like jumping in there and trashing the people who are different from the Nyingmas. A lot of Nyingma tradition honestly, it doesn't have a lot of philosophy. They weren't about philosophy. They haven't been about philosophy. And so it's kind of amazing that, you know, one of the great philosophers of Tibetan history, right, is actually from that tradition. You gave people my email address.
Yes.
Email away.
Very thought-provoking.
If you have time, I wanted to say one thing where you wanted to ask somebody about the Sangha having fear. I had a thought about that I don't know if you wanted to hear, because I'm not a Buddha or anything. But there's the thing that we do where we say, I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So Dharma, at Buddha, I understand Buddha as like buddhi, like the intelligence part.
Yeah. And
Dharma as the right thing to do. And then Sangha as the people who also pretty much have the right thing to do down. But when you depend upon the Sangha, that means that your buddhi is not fully developed, right? So until you are intelligent, I would say, if your Buddha nature is, because man is the Sanskrit word manas, means mind, and mind is what we give to man, right? Is what the name we gave to man in Sanskrit. So through the specialized mind, we can have intelligence to realize what is the true nature of reality. Like perhaps we may be the only kind of animals that can go into that kind of detail, but until you are enlightened, you may fear that you'll get it wrong. So you take refuge in the Sangha. And I just wanted to offer that as maybe a contemplation, but that sort of came to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, well, of course, my problem with it is that the Sangha is usually understood. The Sangha in the three refuges is not just like some other Buddhists or some monks and nuns. It's usually understood as attained beings, people who are Aryas basically. And if that's the case, you would think that they do have awakening. They have awakening. They don't have the ultimate awakening, but they have awakening in the sense of having direct perception of the ultimate nature of reality. And therefore, it's hard for me to see them as having fear. If you think of the Sangha as just some Buddhist
fear can be also compassion, and they're afraid for you and what will happen. You know how a mother is afraid of what's going to happen to their child if they don't get it right, you know, if they don't, maybe in that way. That's as a companion to compassion. Is that?
Yeah, that's possible, right? Because
that's creative. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. I like that one.
Shall we stop now? It's been almost 2 hours. Should we give Guy a break? I've put Guy's email address if anyone wants to write questions
Yeah,
to
thank
him.
you.
I think maybe it's time to say goodnight.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. It's been really wonderful. And we will continue
you.
next week, everybody.
Yeah.
So come back.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.